The boy was playing the violin in the street. But when a millionaire approached and spoke to him, he choked because he was. Before starting the video, tell me where you are watching this video and what time it is. On the cobblestone streets of a bustling city, a boy stood beneath a flickering street lamp. His violin cradled tenderly under his chin. The strings sang a haunting melody, pouring emotions into the cool evening air. His name was Liam, a wiry 12-year-old with messy hair and a smudge of dirt on his cheek. His clothes were threadbare but neatly patched, hinting at a quiet dignity despite his poverty. People hurried past, their faces buried in scarves against the chill, but a few slowed their steps as Liam's music drew them like moths to a flame. Coins clinked into his scuffed violin case, which lay open at his feet. Liam's fingers danced over the strings, coaxing notes so pure and heartfelt that passers-by felt compelled to pause and listen. This was no ordinary street performance. Liam's mastery of the violin was uncanny, all the more remarkable because he had never been taught by anyone. His father, a handyman, had disappeared when Liam was only 7, leaving behind a cheap, battered violin. Liam had spent years teaching himself, often staying up late into the night after finishing his odd jobs for the day. His mother, bedridden and frail, depended on the coins Liam earned to pay for her medicine and keep the lights on. Though young and burdened, Liam's passion for music never wavered. He played not just for survival but for something greater, hope. His music was a lifeline, a way to reach for the dream he clung to, the dream of one day performing on a grand stage before a sea of enraptured faces. When the city streets emptied and silence crept in, Liam often remained under the dim streetlight, practicing. The world became his concert hall, and the stars his only audience. He closed his eyes as his bow moved over the strings, each note filled with raw emotion. His stomach growled, but he ignored it, having skipped dinner yet again. Every penny saved went into a jar for his mother's growing medical expenses. Liam's small apartment was cluttered but meticulously tidy, a testament to his sense of responsibility. His mother, pale and frail, lay on the narrow bed in the corner, watching him with pride and concern. She often told him, "You have a gift, Liam. One day, your music will take you far." Her words were both a comfort and a burden. In his moments of solitude, Liam allowed himself to dream. He imagined himself in a tuxedo, standing in the glow of a chandelier-lit stage, his violin resounding in a grand concert hall. He could almost hear the applause, feel the warmth of success washing over him. But reality was harsher. His hands were calloused from hard labor, and his talent often went unnoticed by the hurried city crowd. Yet Liam never stopped playing. His music was his voice, his way of crying out to the world, "I'm here. I have something to say." And in the hearts of those who stopped to listen, he had already begun to make his mark. Life as a street performer was far from easy. Though Liam's talent was undeniable, the streets were unforgiving. On some days, he could barely gather enough coins to afford bread, let alone save for his mother's medicine. People passed by, their faces indifferent, as though he were invisible. The occasional kind stranger would stop and smile, offering words of encouragement, but they were few and far between. The authorities added to his struggles. More than once, a stern-faced officer had shooed him away, telling him that busking was not allowed in certain areas. Liam would gather his violin case and move to a new corner, trying to find a spot where he wouldn't be noticed, or chased away. There were moments of humiliation that cut deeper than any physical discomfort. Once, as he played a particularly stirring piece, a man tossed a handful of loose change at his feet with a sneer. "Get a real job, kid," he muttered, walking away. Liam's cheeks burned with shame, but he forced himself to keep playing, the bow trembling in his hand. Still, not even the cold glares or the gnawing hunger could keep him from his violin. On his best days, a small crowd would gather, their faces alight with wonder as they listened to the melodies that poured from Liam's soul. Those moments reminded him why he endured the hardships, why he refused to give up. But doubt lingered in the corners of his mind. Could his dream ever truly come true? Or was he destined to remain just a boy on the street, invisible to the world? One crisp evening, as the city lights twinkled and the streets buzzed with life, Liam chose to play a piece he had composed himself. It was a bittersweet melody, a tribute to his mother and the struggles they had faced together. The notes floated through the air, weaving a story of love, loss, and unyielding hope. As he played, Liam noticed a man standing apart from the crowd, his sharp features illuminated by the warm glow of a nearby cafe. The man's tailored coat and polished shoes set him apart from the usual passers-by. He had an air of quiet authority, his piercing blue eyes fixed intently on Liam. The crowd began to part as the man approached, his footsteps measured and deliberate. Liam's heart pounded in his chest, and his hands trembled slightly on the bow. The man stopped a few feet away and stood silently, listening to the last notes of Liam's melody. When Liam finally lowered his violin, the man stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "Where did you learn to play that piece?" the man asked, his voice calm but firm. Liam hesitated, unsure how to respond. Why did it matter? He looked down at his violin, then back at the man. I taught myself," he stammered. The man's eyes softened, and a flicker of something, recognition perhaps, crossed his face. "Who taught you to feel it like that?" he murmured, more to himself than to Liam. The crowd, sensing something unusual, lingered, their curiosity piqued. The question hung in the air, wrapping around Liam like a dense fog. His throat tightened, and he struggled to find the right words. I just play what I feel," he finally managed. The man nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving Liam's. "That melody," he said, his voice tinged with emotion, "it's not just music, it's a story. And you've told it in a way I haven't heard in years." Liam blinked, confused. "Do you know this piece?" he asked hesitantly. The man gave a faint, bittersweet smile. "Do. It was written by someone very dear to me." His words were heavy with unspoken grief, and for a moment, he seemed lost in a memory. The crowd murmured, intrigued by the exchange. Liam felt his face flush under their scrutiny. He wanted to ask more, but something about the man's demeanor held him back. The air was thick with tension, a sense that something significant was about to unfold. "Play it again," the man said suddenly, his voice steady but insistent. "Please." Liam hesitated, then raised his violin to his chin. As the first notes filled the air, he saw the man close his eyes, his expression softening as the music washed over him. By the time Liam finished, the man's face glistened with tears. "You have a gift," he said softly, "and I believe you're meant to share it with the world." Liam lowered his violin, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. The man stepped closer, his tears now wiped away, but the emotion in his eyes lingered. He introduced himself as Mr. Green, a businessman known for his wealth and philanthropy, though Liam had never heard of him before. "You played that piece as if you've lived it," Mr. Green said, his voice trembling with something Liam couldn't quite place. "Do you know its origin?" Liam shook his head. "I don't," he admitted. "It's just something I came up with. Something that felt right." Mr. Green gave a sad, wistful smile. "That piece was written by my daughter," he said, his words carrying the weight of a profound loss. "She was a violin prodigy, one of the most gifted musicians I've ever known. She poured her heart into that melody, and hearing it again, played so beautifully, it's as if she's here with me." Liam's eyes widened. "Your daughter?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Mr. Green said. "She passed away several years ago. A car accident." He paused, his gaze drifting to the ground as he collected himself. "This piece was the last she ever wrote. It's not published anywhere, not recorded, not shared. And yet, here you are, playing it as if it's part of your soul." The weight of Mr. Green's words settled heavily on Liam. He felt his hands begin to shake. I don't know how I know it," he stammered. "It's just something I've always felt in my heart. I never even realized it wasn't mine. For a long moment Mr. Green said nothing, his piercing gaze softening as he looked at Liam. Then, with quiet conviction, he said, "There's a reason for this. And I think it's time we find out what it is." The crowd, now fully invested in the interaction, fell silent as Mr. Green took a step closer to Liam. "You remind me of her," he said. "Not just in your playing but in your passion, your determination." She had the same fire in her eyes. Liam felt a lump in his throat. He glanced down at his worn violin and then at his mother's distant window above the street. He couldn't imagine leaving her. Yet here was this man, a stranger with a kind but authoritative presence, speaking to him as if he were destined for something greater. Mr. Green continued, his voice steady. "I don't believe in coincidences, Liam. You have a gift, an extraordinary one, and I want to help you share it with the world." Liam stared at him, uncomprehending. "Help me?" "Yes," Mr. Green said. "I want to sponsor your education at one of the finest music academies in the country. I'll provide you with everything you need, a home, instructors, resources. All I ask is that you continue to play with the heart and soul you've shown me tonight." The offer was overwhelming, almost too much for Liam to process. I can't," he blurted. "I can't leave my mom. She's sick. She needs me." Mr. Green nodded, as if he had anticipated the response. "And that's why I'll take care of her medical expenses," he said firmly. "She'll have access to the best doctors and treatment. You won't have to worry about her. All I ask is that you let yourself dream again." Tears welled up in Liam's eyes. The thought of leaving his mother terrified him, but so did the idea of saying no to an opportunity like this. He felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, his heart torn between duty and hope. Days after the encounter with Mr. Green, Liam found himself standing in front of a sprawling estate, his violin case clutched tightly in his hands. The world he had known, the bustling streets, the cracked pavement, the faint hum of city life, felt a lifetime away. Now he stood on the threshold of a new chapter, both terrified and exhilarated. Mr. Green had moved swiftly, arranging for Liam's mother to be admitted to a private clinic. For the first time in years, she had access to the care she desperately needed. Liam visited her before leaving, and though it broke his heart to go, her smile reassured him. "This is your chance," she said, her voice frail but firm. "Don't let fear hold you back." Liam's days at Mr. Green's home were a whirlwind of adjustment. He began formal training with instructors who were astounded by his raw talent and emotional depth. For the first time, he learned the techniques and theory that had eluded him as a self-taught musician. Yet, the transition wasn't easy. At the prestigious music academy Mr. Green had enrolled him in, Liam felt like an outsider. Most of his classmates came from wealthy families and had been playing under professional guidance since they could walk. Liam's humble background and patched-up violin drew curious looks and occasional sneers. But Liam was no stranger to adversity. Each day, he threw himself into his practice, determined to prove he belonged. Slowly, his talent began to shine through, silencing those who doubted him. His instructors, once skeptical, became his greatest advocates, marveling at his rapid growth and unique style. As Liam settled into his new life, he found support in unexpected places. Among his peers, he struck up a friendship with Sophie, a kind and spirited girl who played the cello. Sophie, whose father was also a musician, saw past Liam's insecurities and became his confidant. "You've got something no one else here has," she told him one evening after a grueling practice session. "You play like your heart's on fire. No amount of money can teach that." Her words stayed with Liam, bolstering his confidence. Over time, he began to trust himself, not just as a musician but as a person deserving of the opportunities he had been given. Meanwhile, Mr. Green became more than just a mentor. Though initially reserved, he opened up about his daughter, sharing stories of her brilliance and the devastating loss he had endured. In turn, Liam found himself confiding in Mr. Green, talking about his father's disappearance and the weight of his mother's illness. "You're not alone anymore," Mr. Green said one evening, his hand resting on Liam's shoulder. "You have people who care about you now. People who believe in you." The bond between them deepened, becoming something akin to a father-son relationship. Liam felt a sense of belonging he hadn't known since his father's disappearance, and it fueled his determination to succeed, not just for himself but for everyone who had supported him. Years passed, and the boy who once played beneath a street lamp now stood before a dazzling audience in a grand concert hall. Liam adjusted his tuxedo nervously, his hands trembling as he clutched the familiar violin that had been with him through every triumph and struggle. The concert hall was a vision of splendor, its crystal chandeliers casting warm light over the crowd. In the front row sat two people who meant the world to Liam. His mother, her cheeks glowing with health, and Mr. Green, his expression filled with pride. The conductor nodded, and the orchestra began. When it was Liam's turn to play, he stepped forward, the spotlight enveloping him. He raised his bow and closed his eyes, letting the music flow through him. The piece he performed was the same haunting melody he had played on the streets, the one that had first connected him to Mr. Green. As the final notes faded into silence, the audience erupted in applause, a sound so thunderous it seemed to shake the very walls. Liam stood, breathless and overwhelmed, as the crowd rose to its feet in a standing ovation. He had done it. The dream he had once thought impossible had become a reality. After the performance, Liam was greeted by an endless stream of well-wishers and admirers, but the only faces he searched for were those of his mother and Mr. Green. When he finally reached them, his mother pulled him into a tight embrace. "You were incredible," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Mr. Green, his eyes glistening, extended a hand, but Liam shook his head and hugged him instead. "I couldn't have done this without you," Liam said, his voice thick with emotion. As the three of them stood together, Mr. Green cleared his throat. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you," he began, pulling a worn photograph from his jacket pocket. He handed it to Liam, who stared at it in disbelief. It was a picture of Mr. Green standing beside a man Liam recognized instantly. "Your father worked for me many years ago," Mr. Green explained. "He disappeared after an accident at one of my properties. We lost touch, but I've recently begun searching for him. I believe he's alive." Liam's heart raced as he clutched the photo. For so long, he had assumed his father was gone forever. Now there was a glimmer of hope. In the years that followed, Liam's career soared. He performed on stages around the world, his music touching hearts and bridging divides. Yet he never forgot where he came from. Every note he played was a tribute to his mother who had sacrificed so much, to Mr. Green who had given him a future, and to his father whose memory inspired him to keep searching. As the curtain fell on another performance, Liam stood backstage, his violin in hand, a sense of peace washing over him. His journey had been filled with hardship, but it had also been filled with love, kindness, and resilience. The final message of his story was clear. Even in the darkest moments, music and compassion could light the way to a brighter future.